Okay, picture this. The night sky just explodes in color, but not the usual greens and purples we might see sometimes.
No, not at all.
Imagine these really intense crimson, blood red colors. So bright, people said you could actually read a newspaper by their light.
Incredible, isn't it?
And this wasn't just, a local thing. This huge spectacle stretched right across the globe, visible way down south like Cuba, even southern Australia.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's dive into this phenomenal event. We're going deep into the eyewitness accounts of what's called the Great Auroral Storm of 1859.
And what's really striking, right off the bat, is that we're not talking about just one single event here. The sources, they show two distinct, really massive auroral displays, and in very quick succession.
Okay.
The first one peaked around August 28th. Then that was followed by an even more intense display starting September 2nd.
Right.
And that second one, the more powerful one, well, we now know it was directly triggered by this massive eruption on the sun, the famous Carrington-Hodgson white light flare they saw it the day before.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we've managed to unearth this, fascinating collection of historical records.
Yeah, what kind of stuff?
Meticulous scientific papers, compiling firsthand accounts, newspaper articles just brimming with awe, sometimes sheer bewilderment, and even logbooks from ships out on the high seas at the time.
Oh, wow. Ship logs, too.
Yeah. So our mission here is really to transport you back to 1859, to understand how people all over the world living in a completely pre-digital age saw this extraordinary celestial show.
How they perceived it.
Exactly. We want to uncover the important historical bits of this storm, through their own words, because as we're going to see, these firsthand observations, they give us invaluable clues about the scale, the impact of events like this.
Absolutely. Those firsthand accounts are gold. So let's start with that initial event then, around August 28th. What were people actually seeing? What details jump out?
Well, even those early reports, they paint a picture of something really extraordinary. From Vermont, for instance, there's an account saying the sky just dramatically shifted. From green, it went to this deep, intense red.
Red again.
Then, down in Boston, observers described the whole sky being completely overarched, just like a rainbow of different colors.
Wow.
And they even mentioned the merry dancers, that sort of flickering, shimmering movement we still associate with auroras today.
It's interesting, the term merry dancers, you see it pop up in those Boston accounts.
Yeah.
It was already kind of established, especially in northern places like the Shetland Islands, right, for that typical aurora movement.
Ah, okay.
So it suggests people knew what a normal aurora looked like, which makes these 1859 events seem even more remarkable in comparison.
Right, good point. The New York Herald, they really leaned into the drama. They described a blood red appearance. There's that red again, and arrows of light that seem to be like shooting across the entire sky.
Arrows of light, quite the image.
And it wasn't just the colors, the sheer brightness that comes up again and again. In Cleveland, Ohio, one report compared the aurora to a terrible bombardment of light.
A bombardment. Wow.
Yeah, but, and this is interesting, they could still clearly see the stars shining right through it.
That's a key observation, isn't it? This incredibly bright light, but it wasn't like, say, thick cloud cover. It didn't completely block out the stars, highlights that kind of ethereal nature of it.
Precisely. Over in Cincinnati, the aurora was described as having a ghastly splendor with these fantastic spires of light reaching up.
Ghastly splendor. Love that description.
Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., the accounts mention streams of pure milky whiteness and also light crimson. And there is one particularly poetic observer who wrote it felt like resting beneath the wings of the Almighty.
Wow.
It's fascinating, this mix of trying to observe it scientifically and these almost spiritual interpretations.
It really emphasizes just how unusual and, deeply impactful this event was, prompting such, diverse reactions, everything from scientific curiosity to awe, maybe even a bit of religious feeling.
And this incredible show, it wasn't just North America. When we look at observations from the other side of the world, specifically Eastern Australia, keep in mind they're about 15 hours ahead of the U.S. East Coast.
Right.
The descriptions are just as breathtaking.
Yeah, the report from Tasmania called it beyond all conception, the most magnificent aurora ever seen in the colony.
Beyond all conception.
Yeah, they gave these vivid details, a truncated cone of glory at first, and then later they described it flickering in brisk coruscations like quick flashes with a halo, and something they poetically called showers of nebulous matter like stardust.
Stardust. That really captures the almost otherworldly feeling they must have had.
Doesn't it? That image is just...
Yeah. Moving westward in Australia, Cape Otway, they actually documented a sequence of colors, started light blue and green, then shifted to a light yellow-green, before finally turning this deep red with reddy scintillations, almost like a pulsating fan of light.
A sequence.
Interesting. And they also noted, this is interesting too, the presence of dark, heavy clouds at the same time.
The aurora and heavy clouds together. That is intriguing. Makes you wonder about the atmospheric conditions, how the auroral light managed to punch through or interact with those clouds to still be so visible.
Exactly. Further inland, South Australia, near Mount Gambier, there was this remarkable simultaneous sighting, a brilliant meteor, and the aurora, like a cosmic double feature.
Whoa, seriously?
Yeah, and in Adelaide, same thing. They reported a bright meteor immediately followed by this vivid aurora stretching right across their southern sky. And crucially, the telegraph line there was working very badly through the whole day.
Ah, there it is.
Our first clear sign of the storm's technological impact.
That early link, isn't it? Between the aurora showing up and the telegraph system acting up. Even during this first August event, that's a significant clue. Suggests the underlying geomagnetic disturbance was already substantial.
It certainly does. Sydney reported their telegraph wires acting unaccountably before they even figured out that the bright red light they were seeing was the aurora australis.
Took them a while to connect the dots.
Seems like it. And in Beechworth, Victoria, they also noted the aurora's, stunning beauty, how long it lasted, and again, the telegraph wires being strongly affected. This theme keeps popping up. Telegraphs and auroras. Hard to ignore.
These consistent reports from different places, all pointing to the telegraphs messing up during the aurora. It really strongly suggests a direct link, doesn't it, between the geomagnetic activity causing the aurora and these induced electrical currents in the ground messing with the wires.
Absolutely. Even further north in Australia, Moreton Bay, that's basically Brisbane now, they had 3 nights in a row of red aurora, described as gorgeous, lasting for 8 hours each night.
8 hours, wow.
And they could still see stars through it, really underlines how widespread, how intense, and how long this light show lasted.
And we definitely shouldn't forget the observations recorded by ships at sea. Those are so valuable.
Right.
They give us a sense of how far this reached, away from land, and often at surprisingly low latitudes.
That's right. The ship logs, they're full of these reports, and almost all of them describe red aurora.
Red again.
The Messenger, sailing in the North Atlantic, pretty far north, reported a blaze of crimson. The Arcole, much further south, saw a deep blood red cone of light.
Deep blood red.
Then you have the Savannah and the Release, both in the Atlantic, noting a distinct crimson glow. Over in the Pacific, the Saranac described it as brilliantly red, and the Sabine, even closer to the equator, reported a deep rosy red. Seeing these at such low latitudes, much lower than where you'd normally expect auroras, that's quite remarkable.
These ship accounts are absolutely crucial for mapping out the sheer geographic extent of this thing. The number of reports describing red aurora way down at these unusually low latitudes, it's a huge indicator of the storm's power.
And these descriptions, this diffuse red light, they tie in directly with our modern understanding of what scientists call type A red aurora.
Ah, right.
There's actually a photo taken from Hokkaido, Japan back in 1989 that gives you a good visual. It shows this very widespread, kind of structureless red glow just blanketing the sky.
Sounds very much like the 1859 descriptions.
Exactly. Very similar to what many eyewitnesses were describing back then. And what's interesting here is that, historical records from Japan going back like 800 years, they've cataloged other instances of these giant low-latitude red auroras.
Oh, really? So 1859 wasn't totally unique in that specific way?
In terms of the type of red aurora, maybe not entirely unprecedented, but the sheer brightness and the global reach of the 1859 storm, particularly the September part, that seems to have been truly exceptional.
Right. Which makes the displays that started on September 2nd even more extraordinary. Because, by pretty much all accounts, they were even more brilliant, even more widespread than the already phenomenal stuff in late August.
The New York Times initially mentioned that this second round seemed chiefly confined to the southern heavens, at least as seen from New York City, which led some people to think, oh, it's just an aurora australis, a southern lights thing. But as more reports came in, it quickly became obvious this is another massive global event hitting both hemispheres hard.
Indeed. The Times of London reported that across the whole of the northern hemisphere, the sky was lit up so much it was like twilight.
Like twilight at night.
Yeah. They described luminous waves rolling up towards the zenith, actually casting shadows on the ground. Can you imagine? A night so bright the aurora casts your shadow.
That's just astonishing. That level of brightness is incredible.
It really indicates a massive amount of energy pouring into the upper atmosphere.
And understandably, there was some confusion at first. The Rochester Union and Advertiser reported that some folks initially thought the intense light must be from, like, huge fires in nearby towns.
Well, yeah. I mean, in a time before everyone understood what this was, that kind of explanation makes sense, doesn't it? Trying to ground it in everyday experience.
Totally. People would naturally reach for explanations they understood for something so completely alien.
Right.
The Boston Transcript gave this really vivid, dramatic account describing a tremulous flashing, a distinct bank-like arc forming in the north, followed by these towering columns of light toward the zenith. The writer even made this powerful, almost biblical comparison, saying the heavens looked like they were on fire.
Wow. That language really conveys the awe, maybe even a bit of fear, right?
Yeah.
That such a dramatic, unfamiliar sight could inspire.
They also described the aurora giving off this thin, pale light cut through by long, illuminated lines that slowly deepened into crimson. And then there's this truly unique, kind of mysterious report from the Providence Daily Post. It said the auroral light sometimes seemed to be made of threads, like the silken warp of a web.
Silken threads.
Yeah, threads that seem to fall to the earth. I haven't seen that description anywhere else for auroras.
That is a very poetic and intriguing observation. Makes you wonder exactly what kind of auroral structures they were seeing, and what atmospheric conditions might have created that specific look.
And maybe one of the most cited details, you see it everywhere, is the widespread reporting that people could read ordinary print by light around 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, that comes up a lot.
Multiple sources, New York Times, New York Herald, Washington Daily, National Intelligencer. It just paints this picture of a night practically turned into day by the sheer intensity of the light.
It really hammers home the phenomenal energy release during this event.
Yeah.
And how it showed up as this incredibly bright light across the night sky.
The New York Herald got a bit more philosophical, called the aurora an industrial exhibition of the upper air, a silkery in the clouds.
A silkery in the clouds.
Yeah. And then they started wondering, could it be connected to future big events, wars, natural disasters? They even suggested the novel idea of using balloon ascents to study it.
That really reflects that sort of burgeoning scientific spirit of the era, doesn't it? And also the human tendency to look for meaning and connections in dramatic natural events. The balloon idea that shows the early stages of exploring the upper atmosphere.
Exactly. The New York Times also mentioned the remarkable sight of crowds just gathering in the streets simply to watch this unbelievable illumination.
Just standing there looking up.
And their detailed description of both the northern and southern skies with a livid red flame and streamers of yellow and orange crossing the sky like bayonets, it really captures how dynamic and intense it was.
The vivid imagery in these descriptions, it really helps us visualize the scale and the rapid, almost chaotic changes in how the aurora looked.
The Cincinnati Daily Commercial gave another magnificent, detailed account. Started with faint light in the east, crimson in the west, then what they called strange fires overrunning the heavens.
Strange fires?
Yeah, separating into streamers, forming this huge canopy overhead, then spreading out like vapor. They kept emphasizing the shifting colors, and even compared it to angels shifting scenery.
Angels shifting scenery. Beautiful.
And again, they highlighted the near-daylight brightness.
These elaborate, almost artistic descriptions are so valuable. They help us really grasp the visual impact, the sense of wonder this must have caused.
Then you have the San Francisco Herald. With this really dramatic line, the appearance now is positively awful. The red glare is over houses, streets, and fields.
Positively awful. Wow, strong words.
They describe the sky undulating, the bay reflecting the weird colors, and they try to explain it too, blaming nebulous matter in space and the friction of Earth moving through it, reflecting those, pre-scientific ideas.
Yeah, it shows how people were trying to make sense of it, using the scientific knowledge and theories they had back then in the mid-19th century.
And again, the San Francisco Herald also confirmed you could easily read a watch by the light. Even way up high in the Rockies, both the Rocky Mountain Gold Reporter and the Rocky Mountain News had these incredible stories.
What did they say?
People first mistook the intense red sky for a massive fire, and then the light got so overwhelmingly bright that some people, even after midnight, thought it was dawn, started making breakfast.
Making breakfast. Seriously, that's amazing. That really underlines the sheer unexpected brilliance, reaching even remote, sparsely populated areas.
And then we get into some really unusual sort of anecdotal reports.
Oh, yeah.
The New Orleans Daily Picayune made this rather curious claim that local drunkards were falling dead drunk way earlier than usual because of the aurora's mysterious influence.
Mysterious influence, okay.
And they also reported this rather unfortunate story of a gentleman who, mistaking the incredibly bright aurora for daylight at 1 a.m., went out and shot 3 larks.
Oh, no. Poor larks. These anecdotal reports, well, maybe not scientifically solid, but they offer this fascinating, sometimes funny glimpse into the stranger ways people reacted, right?
Absolutely. The Picayune also shared reports from Cuba, where the aurora was apparently described as far more interesting than the usual northern displays.
More interesting. How so?
They said the light came and went, changed outline and brightness a lot, and formed every possible figure over about 3 hours.
Wow. Dynamic.
And from Melbourne, Australia, converging cones of light, a most remarkable amount of disturbance on their declination instrument. That's like an early magnetometer.
Right, measuring magnetic changes.
Yeah, and the pervasive red glare lighting up the whole landscape. Again, you see the global reach and the impact on early scientific instruments.
These diverse accounts from all over the globe, they truly paint a picture of a planet just wrapped in this extraordinary, powerful auroral display. Now let's maybe pivot to another critical aspect, the actual impact on the technology of the day.
Right. Because today we're very aware of how a major geomagnetic storm could be, well, potentially devastating for our electricity-dependent world.
Absolutely.
And while the 1850s were obviously way less technologically advanced, they did have this one critical piece of electrical infrastructure, the telegraph system, essential for communication.
And it was a surprisingly big network for the time. Estimated, 100,000 to 125,000 miles of telegraph lines crossing the globe.
Wow.
It was a vital communication artery. News, business, kind of like the internet of its day in a way.
Exactly. And almost right after that August 28th aurora, reports started pouring in about major disruptions to the telegraph lines. In many places, lines were just rendered completely useless for hours, sometimes longer. In Paris, French telegraphs were greatly affected. Operators even saw strong sparks when they tried to break the circuits.
Sparks. That's a clear sign, isn't it, of powerful electrical currents being induced in the ground by the storm's fluctuating magnetic fields. These induced currents just swamped the relatively weak telegraph signals.
We have this one really dramatic account, a telegraph operator between Quebec and Farther Point. He and his colleagues apparently worked nonstop through the intense aurora, trying to get Associated Press reports through.
Wow.
But eventually they just had to shut the whole line down. The interference from the aurora was too strong. And similar problems were reported way down south as far as Washington, D.C. really shows how widespread the impact was.
Yeah, that emphasizes the huge scale of the disturbance. Hitting telegraphs across such a vast area must have been a very powerful, very widespread geomagnetic storm.
An operator in New York reported considerable difficulty sending messages because of weird variations in the current on the line, and he directly blamed the aurora.
The connection himself.
Yeah. And just generally, operators all over the eastern U.S. said the aurora greatly hindered the transmission of messages. Even lines connecting Louisville, Kentucky, and New York, plus lines all through Canada, were apparently knocked out by what they called an unusual overcharge of electricity.
So that August event definitely had a big, noticeable impact on the telegraph system. Widespread disruptions, delays. But the reports from the September 2nd displays, they're even more remarkable. They hint at something truly extraordinary happening.
Absolutely. This is where we get these incredible stories of the auroral current actually replacing the batteries, the normal power source for the telegraphs.
Replacing the batteries, you mean running on the aurora?
Exactly. There's this truly astonishing report of a conversation between operators in Boston and Portland, Maine. They actually disconnected their batteries entirely.
No way.
Yeah, and managed to send and receive messages using only the electrical current generated by the aurora itself.
That's incredible.
The Portland operator even said it sometimes worked better than with our batteries on.
Better, wow.
And they specifically noted this was the first instance on record of more than just a word or two being sent this way. Really shows the strength of those induced currents.
That is a truly remarkable testament to the power of those induced currents. generated by the geomagnetic storm. It basically turned the whole telegraph network into this giant antenna, just soaking up the natural electrical energy from the aurora.
We also have reports from New Orleans. Strong currents of electricity detected on telegraph wires that weren't even connected to anything.
Just picking it up from the air.
Seems like it, along with other extraordinary electrical phenomena. And in Washington, D.C., operators at the National Telegraph Office apparently sent messages between New York and Pittsburgh with no batteries at all, using only what they call the independent electricity of the air.
These accounts are just compelling evidence, aren't they, of a direct, powerful connection between the aurora and significant electrical disturbances right down at ground level, strong enough to power devices like the telegraph.
And then, of course, there's the story that's become almost legendary now, Frederick Royce.
Ah, the telegraph operator in D.C.
That's the one. Working in Washington, trying to call Richmond, his forehead accidentally brushed against a ground wire, and he got a very severe electric shock. Reportedly stunned him. Someone else in the office actually saw a spark jump from his forehead to the telegraph equipment.
A visible spark. That dramatically highlights the real electrical hazard these induced currents posed. It wasn't just interference, it could be dangerous.
It serves as a stark reminder, doesn't it, of the immense electrical forces involved in a storm like this. A tangible, potentially dangerous consequence of nature interacting with technology.
Definitely.
And just briefly on the economic impact, it's hard to put an exact number on it from back then.
Yeah, I imagine.
But contemporary reports do suggest significant revenue losses for the telegraph companies. Outages, repair costs, retransmissions, it all added up.
And as the sources point out, okay, maybe it was a few $100,000 globally in lost revenue for the telegraph companies themselves, which was a lot then. But the bigger economic hit was likely the collateral impact on the people using the network, right?
And
think about delays in stock market deals, urgent family messages stuck, travel plans disrupted, things that relied on the telegraph.
Yeah.
Even if we can't quantify it precisely, the impact on business and daily life must have been pretty significant for those depending on this relatively new tech.
Sure.
And again, this early vulnerability, even of simple electrical tech like the telegraph, it kind of foreshadows the potential for massive disruption in our incredibly complex, interconnected world today, doesn't it?
It really does. And that leads to a crucial takeaway here. These widespread telegraph problems, they pretty much settled the debate back then. They firmly established the link between auroras and these naturally occurring electrical currents in the Earth and atmosphere.
Right.
And as our sources really emphasize, a similar event happening today with our vastly more complex tech infrastructure, well, it could have absolutely devastating consequences.
It is a sobering thought, definitely. Now, shifting gears a bit from the science and tech, how did the general public, the average person in the 1850s, how did they interpret these absolutely incredible sky shows?
Well, given how totally unprecedented and just awe-inspiring these events were, for most people alive then, they naturally had a huge impact on the public consciousness. Many accounts say nobody could remember seeing anything even remotely like it before. The New York Times reported people listening, wide-eyed, to stories from older folks about past auroras. But the 1859 event just blew those old tales out of the water. Some people even reported imagining sounds with it, like rushing wind across the heavens.
Wow, imagining sounds. The New Orleans Daily Picayune mentioned that thing about crowds gathering on street corners in public squares.
Yeah.
And many of them were interpreting the whole spectacle as like an omen, a sign of some huge disaster coming, or maybe heralding big future events. Drawing on that historical tendency to link weird sky stuff with major earthly happenings.
Right.
These reactions really show how extraordinary natural events can kind of shake up existing worldviews and spark all sorts of interpretations across society.
There was definitely a big emotional and intellectual impact. The American poet William Ross Wallace, quite well known then, he was so moved he wrote a poem about the aurora, published just a few weeks later.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and the poem really captures both the wonder and this kind of underlying terror, but ultimately it finds a message of heavenly love visible even within the fire.
That's a great example of people trying to find meaning, find emotional resonance in it, isn't it? Turning to art, to spiritual interpretations to process something so far outside the norm.
Yeah.
And there's also that intriguing possibility, some art historians suggest it, that the famous landscape painter Frederick Edwin Church, his dramatic painting Aurora Borealis,
Yeah.
might have been directly inspired by these events. because we know he was up in Labrador and Newfoundland right around that time, studying icebergs and the northern lights.
Oh, wow. That's a compelling idea. I mean, as an artist known for capturing the sheer grandeur and drama of nature, it's hard to imagine he wouldn't have been deeply affected by a display like that. So powerful, so visual.
Exactly. But, on a more unsettling note, Harper's Weekly magazine reported a really tragic case.
Oh.
A 16-year-old girl in Ohio. She was apparently so profoundly disturbed by the aurora, she became convinced it signaled the imminent end of the world.
Oh, no.
And she was subsequently taken to a lunatic asylum, as they called it then. It's a sobering story.
Oh.
Really underscores the very real fear and anxiety that something so unprecedented, so unexplained, could trigger in some people. Especially without a scientific way to understand it, and be feeding into existing anxieties about, apocalyptic ideas.
But there are also, thankfully, some lighter, more humorous reactions recorded, too.
Oh, good. Like what?
The Cincinnati Daily Commercial published this satirical chemical analysis of supposed aurora samples they'd collected.
Seriously, chemical analysis.
Yeah, and hilariously concluded they contained hairs of dogtail.
Dogtail hairs.
From some deceased dog that had somehow gotten into a fight up in the heavens?
That's fantastic, using humor to cope with something so bizarre and awe-inspiring, injecting some levity into it all.
And the always entertaining New Orleans Daily Picayune reported several incidents where police in the Garden District found people drunk and totally confused, mistaking the gutter for their beds.
Oh, dear.
All apparently under the mysterious influence of the aurora. Seems the sheer weirdness of the night had some truly peculiar effects on people's perceptions and behavior.
It really highlights the whole spectrum of human responses, doesn't it? From profound awe and art to genuine fear and even some, comical disorientation.
Which kind of brings us to the question of how people back then tried to explain the aurora itself, and how this great auroral storm actually pushed scientific understanding forward.
Right, because before 1859, popular explanations for why auroras looked like rays, they often involved some pretty fanciful ideas.
Like what?
Things like falling volcanic debris, nebulous matter from outer space drifting down, even reflections of sunlight off distant icebergs up in the polar regions.
Iceberg reflections. Okay.
Yeah.
And what about the scientists?
Well, even within the scientific community, some researchers, like Elias Loomis, for example, still thought the aurora was mostly an atmospheric thing. Maybe a very high-altitude type of electrical discharge, like lightning, but happening way up high, originating within Earth's own atmosphere. But the sheer scale, the intensity of the 1859 auroras, that really became a major turning point in how scientists thought about it.
How so?
Loomis, specifically, he gathered all those simultaneous observations from across the globe and used them to make much better estimates of the aurora's height and how far it spread.
Using all that data.
Exactly. His analysis led him to conclude that the auroras during this event formed this huge belt, stretching from about 50 miles up to an astonishing 500 miles above the Earth.
500 miles.
And extending incredibly far south, down to about 22.5 degrees latitude in North America. And crucially, he stated that these findings strongly suggested the influence of extraterrestrial forces in creating auroras. That was a big shift away from purely Earth-based explanations.
That was a really important step, wasn't it? Towards our modern understanding. Acknowledging a possible link to things beyond our own planet.
Definitely.
And while Richard Carrington, the astronomer who saw the flare, while he carefully noted the close timing between his solar flare observation on September 1st and the huge storm and aurora the next day, he was understandably cautious. He didn't immediately jump to say one definitely caused the other. He felt they needed more evidence first.
Which was perfectly good scientific caution for the time. Right. Establishing that definitive Sun-Earth connection required a lot more data, a deeper understanding of the physics involved.
But ultimately, as so many newspapers back then and later scientific studies have pointed out, the great auroral storm of 1859 provided this wealth of crucial new observations, and it played a huge role in shifting both public and scientific perception. It helped lead to a much wider acceptance of that fundamental connection between auroras and the forces of electricity and magnetism, and it pretty much debunked the simpler theories, like the idea it was just light reflecting off polar ice.
So the Great Auroral Storm of 1859 really stands as this powerful reminder, doesn't it, that these breathtaking natural spectacles can also be pivotal moments in scientific discovery, prompting new questions, challenging old ideas, and ultimately leading us to a deeper understanding of how our planet and the sun are connected.
Absolutely. It vividly showed that interconnectedness in a way few events before it had. And it leaves you with a final kind of thought-provoking question, doesn't it? Considering our vastly more complex, interconnected technology today, how might a similar event be perceived now? And what kind of far-reaching consequences might we face, even with all our advanced scientific understanding of space weather?
Yeah, that's the unsettling part.
It certainly encourages, continued and deeper exploration into the fascinating science of space weather and its ongoing historical and potential future impacts on our world.